back to Cooking with Lakers. With Christmas fast approaching, we're going to get on with some of our Christmas baking, and this time we're going to make some traditional mince pies. I'm going to assume that you already have some pastry, either made like I did this morning and chilled it in the fridge for 20 minutes, or maybe you could just buy some in the supermarket in the chilled or the frozen aisle. That's perfectly acceptable too. It's nice and easy. But if you do want to make your own and need a refresher, check out our pastry and apple tart recipe here on YouTube, and that'll show you how. But for now, let's get rolling out our pastry. We're going to start out firstly with our pastry on a floured surface, and we're going to roll it out in order to cut out our shapes. Simple even pressure, forwards and backwards, and we're going to turn the pastry as needed. You can decide how thick you would like the pastry. My preference would be to keep the pastry thin with a decent bit of filling. Once we have our pastry rolled out to the desired thickness, mine is quite thin because that's what I like. Depends on what mold we're using. So this is a silicone mold, it's quite deep, so you might want a large cutting ring. This one here is quite narrow, so again something smaller might work for that. And in my case, I'm going to start with some of these. So this is an older container, and because it might be a bit older, you mightn't feel that it's totally clean, so you can use something like these inserts. So if you're using a deep tray, you might want to use a large base. This is not actually a pastry cutter, but you can use anything that's to hand, because this is going to give me quite a deep one for the base. So if that's going to go inside like this, it's going to make a nice deep filled mince pie. You can also use anything you have to hand, like a ramekin dish either. And then this is a slightly smaller one, so I might use that for a different dish. Say for example on this one, this will fit nicely into this one here. Okay, I'm going to keep cutting out shapes, and I'll be back to you shortly. So after we've cut out enough pieces for the base of each tart, we're going to roll back up the scrap and roll it out to make our tops. One thing to remember is that we're going to cut out a slightly smaller size for the lid, because it doesn't need to be as big as the base. Don't wriggle your cutter around because you'll misshape it. A lot of people will do something like this, and you can end up with a misshapen one. We're at the stage now where we're going to do the filling of our mince pies. And before I do that, I'm just going to use a little bit of water to wet the edges at the top of each of these rings. Means when we put the lid on, it will hopefully stay stuck and all the insides won't leak out. Now you'll always get a bit of seepage, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. It's kind of makes it look more homemade. Our next stage is to add our mince. I have a jar here of homemade mincemeat. You can buy some in the shop just as easily. And you can even, if you feel like it, liven it up with a little bit of alcohol in it. Or use just as it is. So I'm trying to be generous enough with the filling. But if I overfill them, they might ooze out or the lids mightn't fit. And we'll see how we get on with about a heaped teaspoon in each. This recipe has cranberries in it, it has mixed fruit, it has big raisins and sultanas, so it's very nice. If you find it easier, get a second little spoon to help you. If you feel some of them need a bit more, just go back and top them up. So looking at each of those, they look about even. Yeah, I think that's fine. And now comes the point of popping on the lids. So what we want to do is go around the edges of them and just make sure they're sealed as well as you can. Sometimes if you have long fingernails, they get in the way. So that's most of our pies covered. I just want to show you another little trick. If you have star cutters, depending on the size of your pies, you can also add one of those to the top. So what you're doing is you don't have a huge amount of pastry on the top, just a little star to sit and decorate it like that. So using these little shapes just means that you're not using quite as much pastry. If you get near the end of your pastry and you want to make it stretch a little bit further, this will use a little bit less. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to glaze the top of it. So I just have an egg I'm going to mix up. And put this across the top, give it a nice bit of colour. Something else you could do would be to put a tiny little hole in the top. So it might mean that if there's air that needs to escape, rather than bursting open the pie, it can escape through the top. Now these are ready to go in the oven. I'm going to bake them at 170, 180 degrees, probably for about 15 minutes. It may take closer to 20, just till they're golden brown on the top. And while I'm at it, I might as well tell you that an alternative to putting pastry on the top of these would be to make a little bit of a sponge mix and put it on top instead of the second layer of pastry. That would make it a little bit like a Bakewell type tart. Give that a go if you like. There we go, about 16 or 17 minutes in the oven, nice and golden brown. A little bit of leakage here and there, but I'm happy with those.